Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Jones.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Joy.
It's a pleasure to chat with you again. There, your conversation or the conversation we had about narcissism continues to be a community favorite. It's one that people revisit quite often. So I thought that it was great to bring you back for this conversation because it feels like a bit of a spinoff, though not quite. The conversation
Okay.
we're having today is around going no contact with family and friends and romantic partners. So I think that there are a lot of definitions when people are talking about no contact, but in terms of
hmm
your work, what do we mean when we're talking about going no contact?
So, no contact to me means exactly that. It means that once you go no contact, there is no more contact after that. This is definitive. It's done. It's not meant to be an action to encourage another action. Meaning, I'm not going no contact with you to be punitive or to get you to try to hurry up and reach out to me and do all those things. It's no contact because I am trying to protect my mental peace. I have decided that this relationship is not healthy for me anymore. And I think it's better for us to be done with each other. I'm blessing and releasing this relationship. It's done with love, but it's more to protect me and my peace and where I'm at. That is what no contact is. We are done.
Hmm. I appreciate the nuance that you added to that, Dr. Jones, because I do feel like sometimes, and I don't know that this is the definition, but I do feel like there is sometimes a like, oh, is this a manipulation kind of tactic, or is it kind of like a step before a step? But you are saying like, no, this is we tried all of the steps, and this is kind of like the
Yeah.
decision I'm making about what I need to take care of myself and my
Yes,
mental health.
yes, absolutely. Yeah. So this is not manipulativeness. There's not ill will behind it. And there are people who try to use it that way where they try to manipulate, but that's not actually no contact. Those are people that are still very much caught up in toxic relationship cycles, who are still trying to get things to happen on their terms, or they're just used to having certain reactions and certain relationship dynamics. But when you go no contact, this is not meant to be mean. It's not meant to manipulate you, and it's not done to try to hurt you. Now, how you may interpret that, that that's on you, but it's meant to be mostly for my peace. It's saying definitively, I don't want relationships like this anymore. I'm in a different space for that.
And so, I think in both of our work, when a client or somebody finally gets to this place, it is not usually a first step, right? Like this is not typically the first action that somebody takes. Typically, there have been lots of different things that have happened before somebody makes the decision to go no contact. Can you talk about like what's typically going on in somebody's life when they make the decision to?
So I don't think it's the first step for a lot of people. I think a lot of things tend to happen before people go no contact. I don't think it's necessarily healthy for all these things to happen before people decide to go, because usually so much disrespect has happened in the relationship, usually before children or people decide to go no contact with their parents. Usually it's been years worth of stuff. So a lot of times the steps that tend to happen before people go no contact, um a lot of times, again, there's like so much disrespect that happens, and there's, children question, like, you know am I not lovable? Do my parents love me? Am I being a disrespectful child? Family members will often, family members or the community at large will come into play here and say, well, you only get one mama, you only get one daddy, you need to forgive it and forget it and move on. These are your parents. So a lot of times what tends to happen is children especially are conditioned to shoulder the burden of disrespect for many years before they do that. And everything under the sun is typically happening as a part of that dynamic. And so what they will tend to do is they'll come to somebody like me and they'll say, is there something wrong with me? Am I wrong for thinking this way? What is going on? What should I do with this? Well, if I thought about doing this, but I was told by my sister, my brother, my aunts, my grandma, and all of these type of people that I'm selfish and that I need to get over it, or that my feelings aren't valid, or I'm being shown by the community, my church community even, that I need to, I need to honor thy mother, honor thy father, and that basically means that I have to neglect my own emotions before I'm able to do that, before I'm able to say or do anything to protect myself. And so I'm not really clear on what that means. So there needs to be, what tends to happen, especially when it comes to somebody like me, is we get clarity around what's going on, what you're needing from the relationship, and what certain things have meant. So if there's been some disrespect that's going on, or betrayals or things like that, people need to get clarification and validation. Is this something that's like a big deal? Is this something that like I should be worried about? And what I've learned to tell people over the years is, if you take the title away from that person, so if the title of that person was not mom or dad, but was anybody else in your life, what would your actions be? Right? Like, would we be sitting here having this conversation? Would there be so much turmoil? Because a lot of times people will allow their parents to get away with everything, including murder. Um, and only because that's my mama, that's my blood, that's kind of how we are, especially if you're in the Black community. But if we take that away and say, would you allow that in any other aspect of your life, then why are we allowing that here? Because they're actually treating you worse than your worst enemy. So there's all of that sort of processing. There's also processing what that would mean, what that would look like to go no contact. How would your life look? How do you want your life to look? If you were to go down this road, is that something that you're really ready to let go? And so usually there's like a series of actions, there's like a series of confirmations or things that happen before people actually even get to that step. It's not a decision that many people take lightly. Many people, what they tend to do is they may go low contact. So they may stop talking to whomever for a little bit and see how that feels. I always encourage people to do that. Take little vacations or holidays from that person, if you will, to see how your life feels without them in it. So if you for example, if you talk to your mother every day and your mother's cussing you out, she's violating your boundaries, and then you take like 2 weeks off from her, how does your life look within those 2 weeks off of her and away from her? And a lot of times it's significantly better. I'm not anxious, I'm not depressed, I'm not suicidal, I'm not second guessing myself. I actually feel relieved. I don't have to pretend when I'm in the room with her, pretend to actually like her, pretend to actually want to engage with her. I actually feel more authentic towards myself. So those are a lot of the steps that we would take, in going that direction.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, like there are a lot of steps involved, and usually, once somebody gets to the place of feeling like, okay, I'm going to kind of cut off contact with this person, I'm going to go no contact with this person. The response from other people is often what gets in
Hmm.
the way of them sticking with this decision, right? So you mentioned, like there can be,
Yeah.
it's not
Yep.
just cutting that person off; it could also mean cutting off connections to other people in the family or other people in the friend group. Can you say more about
Bingo.
that and how you might manage, being cut off then from these other people as well?
Um, well, I'm going to say something that's probably non-traditional, probably would go against the grain. I tell people mind their own damn business. mind your own damn business. If you don't pay my bills, if you don't know what I've been through, right? Because a lot of times people they're talking out of turn. They weren't raised under the same roof. They don't know what I go through day to day with this person. They're just talking based off of what their experiences are or how they would handle things. But they don't know what this person is like behind closed doors. You don't know my mom is calling me everything but a child of God. You don't know, that my mom tried to sleep with my boyfriend or all these other things, right? That other situations that people go, you don't know what's going on. So if I don't recommend people take blind advice from those who are not familiar with your situation or familiar with the true person that you're dealing with. A lot of people that tell you to do that, they don't even really know who that person is. They're dealing with the actor. They're dealing with the person who puts on the mask and goes out and performs for the world, but they don't know the genuine person, which is who I have to deal with, who I'm talking to on the phone with, who I'm laying in bed next to, whatever the case may be. You don't know that actual person. So I'm going to respectfully need for you to stay in your lane and mind your business. And I'm allowed to be an adult I'm allowed to be the author of my own life. Right. And so I think it really takes that sort of stands, and a lot of people look at that as being selfish. You do have to be selfish to take care of your own mental health. You do have to be selfish in order to mind your own well-being. But that's not selfish in a bad way. It's like you have to take care of yourself first before you can take care of anybody else. But do you ask anybody else for advice when you go to a doctor? When you're feeling sick, do you sit around and wait for somebody? You ask somebody else for advice when you have to eat, or when you have to take certain medications? Do you say, "Hey, I don't know if I should eat today or not"? Do you really do that? So like I think people, when you've been abused for so long, you've been conditioned to second guess your voice, second guess your opinions. But I invite people to, hey, take control of your life back. Take your autonomy back. Start making your own self-directed decisions where you don't need permission from anybody else.
What do you think is often misunderstood in this conversation?
Mm, that's a good question. I think what's misunderstood, and I think a lot of that has cultural nuance, right? But I think probably the biggest misunderstanding is that children don't deserve, especially when you're talking about going no contact with parents. When you're talking about going children, adult children going no contact with parents, I think the biggest misunderstanding is that children don't deserve respect. Children should not be allowed to make their own decisions. Children don't deserve to be apologized to. That children just you should take copious amounts of disrespect. You should take copious amounts of betrayal, and forget how you feel. Just make up every single time. Just forget how you feel. Give them a pass for the simple fact that it's your parents. And I think that's the thing. Or that children should be self sacrificing because their parents decided to give birth to them. So, therefore, because I'm your mother and I decided to give birth to you, no matter how I treat you, you should always be self sacrificing because I brought you into this world and I have labored the cost of having you. Therefore, you need to be eternally grateful and you are forever indebted to me because of that.
And it feels like, I think most recently there was this conversation kind of gained more traction because Oprah did a podcast conversation about like people who have gone no contact. And like one of the headlines that was used was that it was a trend. And, of course, a lot of people who have made the decision to go no contact don't feel like it was a trend because I think trend makes it feel as though this is a decision you made lightly, right? But the other part of that story has been that a lot of the parents have come out and said like, oh, I didn't recognize that there were these things that they felt about me, or the parents have felt that it was unwarranted, right? That like I didn't do anything, so to speak, for this person to go no contact with me. Do you think that that is typically the case, Dr. Jones, that like parents kind of don't realize that all of these things, if we're talking about parents, right? Because that's the example we've used. Do you think it's the case that parents don't realize like the ways that they have harmed their children, or the people who they've been caregivers for, and are like shocked by this decision?
No, I don't think that's the case. I think what happens is that parents don't care. Again, it's more or less you. When you become a parent, there are different stages of parenting, just like there's different stages of a child being a child. And I think what tends to happen with parents, a lot of times toxic parents, still want their child to obey, be obedient to me, and be subservient to me. You are a child, which means you have no voice, you have no power, and no authority. And so, what I've noticed a lot of times with these parents who do this, they often speak to their children in a condescending manner. Like, you do not have the right to feel the way that you do, to speak up and say anything. You need to stay in a child's place, right? And it's often that sort of negative rhetoric, and it becomes a rhetoric so much so that they don't want to hear what their child is saying to them. They don't respect their child's evolution into adulthood, but they don't respect their children in general, because I think even when a child is small, or a baby, they still need their voice respected, their boundaries respected. Children need to be listened. They're their own autonomous human being. And what you have a lot of times in these cases with these parents is like, I don't see my child as an individual. I don't want my child to be a free thinker. I want my child to be something that I control every aspect of their life. I have the say so, and I don't really want any sort of rebuttal. I don't want any individuality. I don't want any sort of difference of opinion. I just want what I want. And so I kind of bulldoze my way through that relationship. And so when you have people, parents that think like this, they just want what they want. And they've heard it before. The most of the kids, adult children, have tried to talk to them. They don't want to hear it. They shoot it down. And parents will give their children the silent treatment. Now that's more of the manipulation piece, where the parents will stop talking to their child and they'll stonewall the argument, and eventually the child sort of caves in, and okay, mom, or okay, dad, I have to do this. I have a relationship with you. I have to give in and let you have your way. Otherwise, we don't have a relationship. So a lot of times children are in this relationship through manipulation and fear. If I don't cater to my parent, if I don't give them what I want, then we don't have a relationship. And I want some kind of relationship with them. I don't want to be in this world alone or without my parents. So I have to capitulate and give them what they want.
And you've talked about this and then framed this as a way of kind of people making this decision to protect their mental health as a step, kind of towards their well-being. But oftentimes people are seen as difficult or dramatic or doing too much if they are setting boundaries in this way. What do you think needs to change for us to expand that conversation beyond people being dramatic if they make a decision like this?
What does that even mean for somebody to be dramatic? And again, I think that's the thing. What does that even mean for someone to be dramatic? How you would handle a situation is not necessarily how I handle a situation. So being dramatic is open to interpretation, right? And you also have to think about, like, which a lot of people don't, right? But you also have to think about what's happening on the other end for somebody to have such an adverse reaction to what's going on, if that makes sense, right? So if I'm being dramatic, what's happening on the other end of that where I'm being dramatic, right? Especially if you know that that's not my personality style, or if you don't know me at all, right? So I think that's one thing. But I also think, going back to what I was saying before, sometimes people need to understand and respect, they need to know their place and respect a boundary. So a lot of times people will not interfere or speak up until the abuser triangulates them and brings them into a situation. What an abuser wants is an audience. They'll they'll quickly have a lot of people come to defend their honor. And so when you think about children who go no contact, the first thing I said, well, where was the community? Where's the community been all this time? So where have your grandparents been all this time? Where have aunts and uncles and people who've actually witnessed the abuse? Where have they been all this time? What have they been doing? Have they interfered and been a safety net for you up until this point? And a lot of times it's no, they haven't been, or oh, they always chose to look the other way, or they've said, oh, it's not my business. But now all of a sudden, all these people come rushing to the aid of or the defense of someone who's an abuser. So they're very selective with their help and interventions, and it's all one-sided. And again, it's very it's mostly geared towards one person, whereas you ostracize the other person or keep them out, or it's like you need to just calm down and you need to be more subordinate and get back in your lane. And so I would say that people, if they're going to intervene or be a safe space, you need to listen and hear with what's really going on and not come in towards the tail end of the story or be swayed by one person on everything, if that makes sense.
Hmm. Yeah. And do you think that there's a difference between going no contact with, like parents versus like a sibling versus like a friend, or a former friend? Is there a difference in what the no contact looks like typically?
I wouldn't say there's a difference in what no contact looks like. What I would say is it's typically more difficult for people to go no contact with their parents, because again, people, it's constantly being hammered. You only get one set of parents. You need to, and so and it's your parents. You do only get one mom. You do only get one dad. So I would say it's harder for them to do that. At least in my experience in working with them, than it is with siblings and with friends. Friends, you can go out and get another one. Siblings, if you have another one, it's usually a little bit easier. Another one that's supportive, or that you at least have a relationship with. But parents, that's a little bit more finite for people, and so once you're done with them, and those are all you have.
Yeah. What does, as a clinician supporting somebody through the grief process of going no contact, look like? Because even though, it may have been an abusive situation, not a great situation, it is the situation that you had. And there is, of course, still typically some grief related to having to cut off that relationship. So, what does it look like to support somebody after they made that decision?
Absolutely. Uh, Yeah, so I think it's important to educate people on what no contact is. So there's a lot of education around what it is and what it isn't, right? There's a difference between no contact and low contact, but also educating a person on why they would do certain things. So people need to be fully educated and informed. And so I think there's that. There is also um, making sure that a person is ready to do that. So again, again, it's a finite situation. It isn't you stick your toe in the pool and then you come back, and then you stick your toe in the pool again and then you come back. It really should be more of a, this is a final decision. Like I'm okay. I'm at peace with it, and so understanding what that means. And so what I have done, when people have started to talk about that, is to, advise people like, okay, well, you want to be sure to do that. And part of the ways in which you want to be sure to do that is maybe you do want to take a break from your parents, because it's easier to say, I'm going to take a break as opposed to I'm going no contact. So maybe you might want to take an extended break and see what your life is like without that parent first before you commit to something that is should be a permanent decision. And so people do that. But then we also go through the grieving process of what that means, because a lot of times um, going no contact is really like grieving two deaths in one person. So it's grieving for the parent that you actually hoped you could have, and the parent you actually do have that is physically still here on earth, right? And a lot of times the grief is harder for the parent that you wished for, that you longed for, that you hoped that they would magically turn into one day. And so a lot of times that's hard for people, is to like process the death of what could never be and what will never be, as opposed to what is. And so we work through ways of doing that. And then we move through that, and sometimes that's typically the longest part, is the grieving the death of what will never be. And then, of course, you get to that place of acceptance. When you get to that place of acceptance, you say, okay, well, I've let go of the person that will never be, and now I have accepted my parents for who they actually are, or that person for who they actually are. And so I'm not sugarcoating anything, and I understand this is what actually needs to be done for my mental health, for my sanity, in order for me to go through life, to have the type of life that I want. I understand the ramifications of it. I understand how this person has affected me all of these years, and I don't like that. So I'm allowing myself to be honest with myself about what this means. And then once we move to the place of acceptance, we can allow space for other people to come in and fill that void. So I often encourage allowing space for like mother like, or father like, or grandmother like, or grandfather like figures to come into your life to provide that nurturing care and support that you wish for all those years with your parents, but you never got.
And typically, like Dr. Jones, if you had a client who you were working with this on and they are kind of in the beginning stages, like not quite sure if they want to go no contact, is this typically a conversation that you'd be encouraging them to have, to let mom know, like, hey, I no longer want to be involved in your life or want to have you a part of mine? Or is it kind of just gradually just we don't talk anymore?
I don't usually encourage that. I don't usually encourage it, especially when there's a lot of like manipulation and stuff going on, or your parent is high conflict. If you have a parent that's highly conflicted, uh, is volatile, physically aggressive, and things, I don't encourage trying to have those types of conversations, especially when you yourself aren't clear. Uh, when you become more clear and definitive, and you can actually walk away and you're not invested in a result, then maybe you can have that conversation. Everybody's situation is different. Sometimes people have parents that are highly volatile, and it's just not safe for them to do that. So everybody's situation is different, but I don't encourage that type of conversation until you're clear, you're pretty definitive of what you're going to do, and you're ready to be done after that. Otherwise, I think that's more or less something you need to be processing with your therapist. You need to have your own sense of clarity and autonomy on that decision and come to terms with that. In my experience, a lot of times, when people go no contact when their parents, and this isn't every situation, everybody's situation is different, but a lot of times when people go no contact with their parents, um, it's fine. If they're not reaching out to their parents aren't reaching out to them. that person is the only person that's keeping the relationship alive. So there's that. You can also have parents that are highly enmeshed as well, that they want to be involved in every aspect of their child's life. But a lot of kids, what they fail to realize, if they don't do anything, the other person is not going to necessarily do anything until they need or want something. But and so a lot of times, if they're not overdoing it, trying to make that connection with the parent, you know, things might wither away all on their own.
Hmm. The other question I have, Dr. Jones, is around like the logistics, especially when we're talking about a family member, right? So, like you just said, virtual or like telephone contact is one thing, but what about like family events, right? So, let's say I've gone no contact with my dad, but then my brother is getting married. So then do I make the decision not to go to the wedding because I'm no contact with dad? Do I go and just avoid contact with dad? Like what kinds of decision making can you explore there?
That's a good question. And I think you have to assess how important that relationship is with you. So, if that relationship is still very much important with you, still very much a part of your life, if your brother's getting married, as was the example. So, if you want to show up for your brother, then show up for your brother. Don't allow anybody to take that power away from you. You can still go in. And again, I would encourage processing this with your therapist, but always have your boundaries, have your limits. You could certainly be cordial if you guys are going to be in the same space, but chances are, if you give that parent too much energy or too much airtime, they might show up and act a fool. And you could let the other person know, right? So you could let your brother know, hey, I'm going to show up for you, and you kind of know where I'm at with this relationship, and I want everything to go smoothly, but here's what I'm not open to, and I want this day to be about you and not about our family conflict. And so these are my intentions. I'm going to show up for you. I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, but outside of that, I can't be a part of all this other stuff, right? So you could set limits. You can also prepare the other person without it um, encroaching too much on their celebration, but you could let them know what you will and won't do, and just be very graceful about it.
Yeah. And what does it look like for us to maybe support somebody in our lives who has made the decision to go no contact? Right. So, instead of saying like, oh, you only have one father, you only have one mother, like, what does it actually look like to support somebody in their decision to go no contact?
Everybody's a little bit different. Oh, sorry. Everybody is a little bit different, but I think the the best way is to ask them, how can I support you? You know, what in what ways do you feel like support is needed for you while you're kind of going through this? Some people don't want to talk about it. Some people may want to talk about it later on. Some people may need this, that, and the other thing. And so you can ask and say, how can I show up for you? Would it be helpful if I did X, Y, and Z? I want to respect whatever your boundaries are. So you can just ask and see how you can support them.
Dr. Jones, something that often comes up around these conversations, and I think we've had some version of this conversation before, like these terms that are often thrown around in terms of somebody being toxic or abusive, or, like how are you working with clients to kind of get some clarity around what they're meaning when they say certain things?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a good question. So a lot of times, what I will ask people to do is to clarify that. So how do you define that? Like, what are you using to gauge that, right? Especially now that social media is as big as it is. A lot of people are getting their ideas or their definitions from social media. So I always ask them to clarify that and tell them to explain to me how that person is impacting their life and their livelihood. right? So can you, let's piece this out. How is this person affecting your life? Is this something that was a one-off situation, or is this like something that's happened, over the years many times over? Like, how do you define that, right? Because those are words that I've used, right? And those are words that you have used and that Oprah or whomever has used. How do you define that for yourself? And a lot of times people will have different meanings. Um, it's also helpful to uh, take culture into context, because I've worked with people who are from all over. So how I define things or look at things in the US might be different from how people from Africa look at things over there, right? Because the US is a very individualistic society. So we're all kind of like, hey, this is what I want from me. This is what I need from me. But then you might have people that listen to me or watch you that's from a very collectivist society. So they can't move with, just out of their family like we say we can move, so it's going to be different. And I try to take into account cultural nuances and things like that as well.
You bring up an interesting point because I think definitely, somebody from a more collectivist culture would probably have more of a struggle with like going no contact, right? Because it is so much of one big unit. Can you share anything there or any kinds of considerations you might
Hmm.
think about if somebody does come from that kind of a culture or background?
Absolutely. So I think with even within collectivists, which is, they're looking for the greater good of the family unit, the greater good of the community, but still there is some level, or should be some level, of individual autonomy. So even within a collective group, all the members still have to be doing well. And every culture is a little bit different. There's some, even within cultures, there's subcultures. Some require complete subordination, meaning that you can't say anything, or some require that if you are a woman have to get in line, right? And some people, if you take it to an elder in your family, and then you get some advice from an elder, they can help you navigate the situation. So I try to use tools within that community whenever it's possible. It's not always possible to do that, especially if the whole family is toxic. So, for example, and this isn't meant to be discriminatory or prejudice or anything, but I've worked with Arab cultures before as well. And a lot of times in several Arab cultures, the whole family could be at odds, so everybody is fighting. And so we look at ways in which what what's most beneficial for you, but they're also very heavily enmeshed. So while everybody may be fighting, we might work together. We might live together. We might go to church together. So I can't just get up and walk out. Otherwise, that's going to create a whole different polarity. So it's talking about what we can do within that culture, that's also safe for you within your family. And then we also talk about whether or not that's realistic or not. And sometimes it's not realistic to stay connected to the entire family unit without having to walk away from all of it, because all of it is toxic. All of it is abusive. We put hands on each other. Men have sexually abused within my family. Whatever the case may be, sometimes we can't stay connected. And so we talk about what's realistic, what's practical, what you're willing to do, and whether or not that's feasible for you to have some peace and clarity. So I hope that helps to answer your question,
Mhm.
Dr. Joy.
Yeah, yeah, it does. We know that it is incredibly difficult to leave abusive situations, right? Like, especially, in like domestic violence kinds of situations, we know that there's like 7 times before somebody leaves a situation. So it is incredibly difficult to extract yourself from a relationship that is abusive. What kinds of things make it more likely that somebody is able to kind of remove themselves and kind of permanently go no contact? What kinds of supports do you think need to be in place?
Again, everybody's different, but I think the biggest thing would be finances. So if you're able to navigate this world, without, like, I think just even just being able to cover your cost of living, that's probably going to be a huge one. Like being able to take care of yourself, being able to cover all of your living expenses, you will be able to navigate this world much easier, versus someone who is financially dependent on someone else, or who's never who doesn't know anything about managing finances. So I would say that that's huge, because that's probably the number one thing that I would say that people fight over, or the number one way that people control other people as well. So I think that's number one. Number two, and again, it doesn't mean it's less important, but number two is your mental health and well-being. So if you have sound mind, you have you have confidence and wherewithal in other areas outside of your life. You can make sound decisions for yourself. And I'm not saying that we can't make mistakes, because we can certainly make mistakes, but by and large, you know what it takes to be a functioning adult in this world, and you can manage most things. I think that's number two, right? And just sort of, you can take care of yourself. If your mental health gets out of balance, you will make that decision to go to therapy. You will go and take that antidepressant if necessary. You have that way of sort of rationalizing and taking care of yourself and prioritizing yourself in that way. Um, Number three, uh, I would say validation. You have to be able to validate yourself. There's a good chance that when you walk away, you go no contact, you might lose a lot of the validation that you had, but that cycle of people that were in line with the person that was abusive to you. You might lose family validation, you might lose family support, you might lose relationships, or relationships can be deeply impacted by it. There could be a ripple effect. So you have to be okay with that. And sometimes for a lot of people, you have to be okay with being by yourself. You got to be okay with navigating the world all alone, and it's you and just you and nobody else, and nobody cares, because once you've walked away, you have become public enemy number one. So you have to be okay with navigating spaces by yourself. You have to be okay with having your birthday by yourself, having your wedding by yourself, all of these things, right? You have to be okay with that. And so you have to also be okay with starting over and really building your community from scratch. You don't have that choice when you're a kid. When you're little, you're a baby, your family and things like that are already chosen for you, but now you basically have to pick and choose, and that could be a beautiful thing. You have to pick and choose your own community now. And so you literally have to build everything from the ground up, and so you have to be okay with that. A lot of people don't like being by themselves, and that's really one of the harder parts for them. Like, I don't want to be by myself. I don't want to be without my partner. I don't want to be without my parents. So you have to be okay with being alone. You have to get comfortable with being alone and standing on your own, because a lot of times that's what's required to be an autonomous individual, to be a free thinker, to be a person that is okay with having different schools of thought. So you have to be okay with that. I would say those are the top three things. And number four, I think, is being okay with having conversations about your decisions. So what that looks like is like, okay, being okay with saying, oh, I don't have a relationship with my parents, and being able to stand in your truth without feeling ashamed, without feeling embarrassed, without feeling like you have to like explain or justify or say something on the back end so people feel like you're an okay person or nothing's wrong with you. I think that's the bigger thing, is like feeling like you don't have to justify yourself, you don't have to explain yourself. You made this decision and you're okay with that. And I think that's the thing, is like being able to navigate those conversations about that.
That's incredibly helpful. Thank you for that, Dr. Jones. In the,
Yeah.
the early part of the conversation, you said that you kind of feel like people almost wait too long before they go no contact because they tend to kind of put up with a lot of disrespect, a lot of abuse. How do you know, like, what the line is? How do you know whether just some good old boundary setting will work with a relationship versus when it may actually be time to go no contact?
That's a good question. Um, Joy, I'm Dr. Joy. I'm 46 years old, so I think about this a lot differently than when you probably interviewed me. I don't know how many years ago when you first interviewed me. So I think about this a little bit different now. Now that I'm almost 50. Now that I'm almost 50, I would say, and this might be a little harsh for people, but I would say you want to draw the line at the first sign of disrespect. At the very first sign of disrespect, it can be very hard to walk it back, especially with family. Family knows what buttons to push because they've created and designed those buttons. And so a lot of times that disrespect would go on and on and on. And sometimes it gets to a point where you don't even know you're being disrespected anymore. You know what I'm saying? Because it's so common. It's, oh, well, that's just how we do things. That's how they've always talked to me. Oh, it's no big thing, until someone from the outside looking in is like, whoa, what happened there? What was said there? That's kind of crazy that your mama talks to you like that, or that your daddy talks to you like that. What is that about? And so now that I'm older, I would say you want to get very comfortable with drawing the first line, with drawing the line at the first sign of disrespect. And that's with anybody, anybody. Because if you don't, people will continue. People will continue to disrespect you. So you could, with family and things like that, I understand you definitely want to speak to that and you want to nip that in the bud right away. But chances are, if you're listening to your podcast, my podcast, chances are you're an adult. So chances are that's been going on many years before they came to me and you to listen, right? So we're probably already at a point where it's gotten to be kind of crazy. And so what I would do then is I would set the limits. I would say, you know what, you need to kind of do some things before we have that conversation. I'm going to pull back some of my energy. And so maybe what that looks like, if my mother, as a hypothetical example, if my mother comfortable with being disrespectful to me. A good example would be if I've told my mother something in confidence, and my mother turns around and tells everybody who would listen all the things that I've told her in confidence, ultimately betraying me. I'm not going to tell you things in confidence anymore. I'm not going to tell you or share things with you that I would not mind if they were published on the front page of the newspaper. So you're going to be treated just the same as I would treat like a work associate, right? When it comes to my personal information, you'll have to learn just like everybody else learns about that type of stuff, right? So you don't get the same amount of privilege that I've just been giving you to my own detriment, if that makes sense. So I'm a little bit more selective about what I share with you. I'm also a lot more conditional, right, in terms of our relationship. Like, we can't go back to a place of comfort until X, Y, and Z happens. And that's not me trying to um, exert my power or authority or being manipulative over my mother. It's like, in order for us to have a good relationship, or to even see if we have the potential for a good relationship, maybe we got to go to therapy. We have to go to a neutral third party. We've got to talk about some stuff, and we have to really establish those boundaries. So if we can get back to a place of understanding, if we can get back to a place where there's respectful communication. Well, I don't want to hear a therapist. I don't want nobody in my business. Well, these are what my conditions are. Like, I love you as my mother, but like, my conditions are, in order for us to continue like this, we have to go to a place, we have to get to a place where we can respect each other, where we can communicate and talk to each other without you calling me everything but a child of God, without you getting out of character and things like that. So I would say we go, that those are some of the things that we can do, but you you have to be the agent of change, because what tends to happen, especially when we're talking about our parents, especially if your parents are older, if they're like 60, 70, 80, 90, or however old they are, there's a good chance, I won't say always, but there's a good chance that your parents are who they are, and they're not changing. They're not changing for you. They're not changing for anybody, because they don't see anything wrong. So you have to be the agent of change in your life, regardless of whether or not they change or not.
And that can be difficult, right? Like to know, to your point around, the grief of the parent that you wish that you had, coming to terms with the idea
Hmm.
that this is who they are and I got to deal with
Yeah.
the reality of it. Yeah.
Bingo.
Yeah. Well, this has been so helpful, and I think a lot of our community will really appreciate everything you shared, Dr. Jones. Please remind us where we can stay connected with you. What is your website, as well as any social media channels you'd like to share?
Absolutely. So I'm across all social media platforms. Probably the one that's most popping right now is my TikTok. And of course, I've been, we've been pod sisters for I don't know how many years now. What is it, like 8 years? Is it going on 8 years, Joy? Uh,
I think closer to 10, Dr. Jones.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So I've lost some. COVID makes me lose some time. Yeah, so 10 years we've been doing this thing, right? But of course you can find me on my podcast, A Date with Darkness podcast. Um, my website, drnataliejones.com. So I have some other things that I have in the works for you guys that are going to be showcased soon enough. But drnataliejones.com, you can find me on there, and that gives you the link to everything. And of course, I appreciate you having me on here.
Of course. Thank you so much for joining us again. And we'll be sure to include that in our show notes.